All right. Good evening, Red Star Rebels. I'm Hal G. Lohr from the hashtag New Cal Exit podcast, Red Star Report. For tonight, I'm going to take a break from my usual rants on all things California to speak with one of the most well respected global voices you will ever find on the subject of independence and self rule. He would be best known to Californians for his 1993 novel, which became the movie in 1996, Trainspotting. Scottish novelist, playwright, screenwriter, film director, all around storyteller, and fierce advocate for Scottish independence, Irvine Welsh. Hello and welcome, Mr. Irvine Welsh. It's an
Thank
absolute
you.
pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
So, I'll admit, to get myself in the proper frame of mind for this interview, I thought last night I'd watch Trainspotting again when I watched that movie in the 1990s for the first time, it didn't register with me the absolutely frustrated independence roar in the Scotland is shite scene. Was that the first time you really incorporated a Scottish independence voice into your writings?
No, yeah, not really. I mean, I think it was, in my lifetime, there's really been three phases of Scottish independence. And it was, I think that the first one was basically like, it's all England's fault. We were kind of oppressed and persecuted by them, and they kind of so it's all their fault basically. So there was a lot of when I was growing up, there seemed to be a lot of anti-English feeling, and that kind of disturbed me because I had relatives in England, and I went down to and I always used to go down to London for the summer holidays and stay with my aunt, and I moved down there on the punk scene. So I was I was very anti that kind of brand of Scottish nationalism, if you like. I was kind of very much, and I grew, that was it came, it was a very different Britain then. It was a Britain of the welfare state and the nationalised industries and full employment and comprehensive education, tax rebates, all that sort of stuff that. The state actually gave things to people then rather than kind of just basically met them in a very repressive kind of way as it does now. So Britain was very different then. And Scottish nationalism was very negative, I thought. It was a very negative force. And then a second phase of it that I remember was a very, was again a kind of, it was sort of, it went from being it's all the English's fault to it's our own fault. We do this to ourselves. We put up with all this nonsense, and we kind of we oppress ourselves through division and through sort of not really not really grasping our own sense of kind of identity and power and all that sort of stuff. So there was a sort of again, it was quite negative. It was a kind of self-hate thing, basically. So the hatred went from England to a kind of self-hate thing, and really, I got on board with the whole idea of Scottish independence in the third phase, which was the phase we're currently in, which is a much more pragmatic phase, really, where people thought, well, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is, it's irrelevant whose fault it is. The point is to come to some kind of set of arrangements whereby we can move to better government locally for not just for Scotland, but for the rest of the UK as well. And that is decentralised government, it's smaller government, it's post imperial government, it's a government where for citizens, where you're not factoring in antiquated imperial elites with their snout in the trough to make sure there's not a lot for anybody else by the time they're finished. So, I mean, that's I think is a big fear from the establishment in Britain about Scottish independence. It's not really there's no particular any great love for Scotland or any desire to hold on to Scotland. It's like if Scotland gets it, it's instantly got rid of the monarchy, the House of Lords, the public school system, the City of London. People in England are going to start saying, "Well, I think we should have some of that as well," because there's so much of the resources of the nation goes to all this kind of nonsense that contributes nothing to the well-being of the nation.
Yeah, and Scottish independence right now is making news globally. I mean, it's all over. For those who are unaware, it's like on the 15th of February, probably the biggest story in Scottish politics happened when First Minister of Scotland and Scottish National Party leader Nicola Sturgeon announced her intention to resign. Can you give us your thoughts on where that puts the Scottish independence movement today?
It's interesting because there's a very there's all these different strands in the independence movement, and there's a thing that amongst a lot of people in the independence movement, that the independence movement is much more than the SNP, and the SNP has been ran as a very tight, disciplined party. It's not really tolerated much dissent, um, and I think that. They've continually tried all legalistic routes and all ways of advocating that there's a democratic deficit, which there is obviously since Scotland voted to stay in the EU and it's been pulled out of the EU on the vote for the rest of the UK. So there is a legitimate concern there and a legitimate kind of idea that the referendum should be rerun because of these kind of substantive changes. Now, the UK has turned a deaf ear to this, like in the same way that Spain has done with Catalan. It's just been this kind of impasse, and I think that there's this whole thing that's happened in the West that in that we feel that we've created a system whereby all the wealth of the Western nations is being siphoned off into a small kind of global and national, or kind of they're both global because even the so-called nationalistic politicians have their offshore accounts where all the taxpayers' money is funneled into. So we have this we have an idea that we can't contest economics anymore and finance, that everything that's been won, the kind of neoliberal argument has been won, and the power of all these elites globally is just so dominant now that the economic kind of the economic arena can't really be contested in any meaningful way. So that's everybody's got because of that, people feel that they have to contest cultural issues and particularly identity politics. And the SNP probably very unwisely in terms of politics has got mixed up in this, and they pursued this gender recognition act to try to give trans people the right to determine their own gender, and it was like quite a kind of confused push through piece of legislation, miles beyond what the Scottish electorate would kind of really stand for, and it wasn't, it was just a bad piece of politics, really. And it was quite strange because Sturgeon has been such an effective leader in UK terms, and I think it's just that thing that when people are in power for too long, they have a sense of they think that leadership is about just taking people with you all the time, whether they want to go or not. And you lose sight of what your base is actually thinking. She was surrounded by a strange cabal of people who didn't really, who kind of almost seemed to have almost not, independence became less of a thing than the actual administration and government of Scotland on an ongoing basis. And this has been a kind of trap that the SNP and the Green Party and the coalition have got themselves into. It's that thing. Are we a movement for independence? Do we just constantly advocate for independence? Do we look at ways, parliamentary, extra parliamentary ways in which we promote independence? Or are we actually running this country? Are we running this country as a devolved government? So there's a tension between the two, really. And I think probably the problem with the SNP was under Sturgeon is that they just got too interested in the status quo. They got too comfortable running this devolved government.
It's interesting that you mentioned nationalism. In an article I found from 2015, you wrote English nationalism has always been the elephant in the room, and it seems like the demands made from north of the border will precipitate a reaction from the south, and encourage future or further political polarization. That really rings here in the United States right now. That polarization sounds very familiar to what we're seeing in conservative U.S. red states talking about national divorce, as opposed to the more progressive values we see as a basis for California independence. Do you think there may be a parallel there?
Well, I think everything is polarized now. We're in this era of of a kind of this kind of whole media era now that we're in. We're not really in it. Everything becomes very very polarized. And I think that we are in this era, as I said, of contestability about culture. And I think that the thing about the red states, blue states now thing in America, it has almost become like a kind of a fully fledged culture war with all these kind of different strands to it. And it seems to be about a very two very archetypal ways of life that in my experience of America, and I haven't been over. I mean, I was over just before Christmas, but I haven't been over for any prolonged length of time. But the media construct, the stuff that you see on social media, that kind of polarization, and the political polarization with the parties, and they're all part of that apparatus, seems to be very divorced from the way that people actually are. It's a bit like here, people are kind of on the ground. People just chat and they get on and they argue about things and they discuss things, but the media representation of it, which kind of becomes a political reality because politicians are so immersed in the whole kind of media construct, is that the country is incredibly divided and it is becoming more and more divided. So I think that yes, I think it's like I read an article the other day there about some Republican senator or Congress person was trying to suggest that Democratic families moving into Republican areas should be denied the right to vote, and all this kind of crazy stuff. That seems to be that seems to be lending itself to that kind of polarization. And it's interesting that you see that a kind of that the idea of setting up smaller states. I mean, the United States has this constitution about indivisibility, and it kind of it's not really it's not it's not and it's this has always been a kind of almost like a sort of kind of right wing thing about the American Constitution, defend the American Constitution. And now it's interesting, the noises are coming from people in the right wing in the red states about independence for Texas and Florida and all this sort of stuff. So I think it is an idea right across the political spectrum that is coming of age because of this polarization.
All right. If you don't mind, I'd like to bring in California National Party Chairman Sean Forbes. I believe he's got a question for you. If that's
Hi there. Yes, again, I'm just happy to join again, guys, and happy to talk to you again, sir. Actually, I just had a question that came from Bill Scott, our NorCal chapter coordinator. Bill actually wanted to ask, police reform and police issues are so major in the United States, and it's such an outweighing thing. How did your interactions with the police influence your outlook on life? The question being, growing up, Scottish police and how they were thought about, I guess.
Yeah, I think you kind of, if you grow up in a housing scheme in Scotland, you do have a sense of yourself being the kind of bottom of the pile, basically, and you do have a sense that you're policed differently from people in more affluent suburbs. I mean, I was arrested at 8 years old for playing football in the street with some pals, and you're kind of very scared at that age. You think you're going to get taken away, you're going to be incarcerated, and you're going to be taken away from your mum and dad and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite. And then you go up to the court, and the guy in the court says, "This is ridiculous. These kids shouldn't be up there." But you have still got the criminal record. And then you go into school and you start, you start swaggering around like you're Al Capone and all that, you know. So you get this, you get your view of where you stand is very much formed by these kind of interactions and these early interactions with the police. And I think it still happens in working class communities all over Britain, and it happens to there's terrible things that have happened to women. There's been a few really high profile cases in the Metropolitan Police in London of really awful things that have kind of like, you know, the multiple rapists and the sort of and then someone else who had done a terrible murder and who was kind of backed up by all their colleagues in the police force. So there is a kind of poisonous, kind of toxic culture that exists in kind of any organization that is about you know, social control and authority is going to have that kind of thing going on. But the extent of it has been pretty sobering for a lot of people in Britain to come to terms with. And obviously, it's, you know, America. It's been absolutely highlighted. It's mainly been highlighted through race, but it seems that, you know, it's like there is an issue with policing a decaying society, because if you look at the states now, if you look at kind of Western states, they can't really offer inducements to the populace anymore. You know, the way you know, they used to be able to, basically they used to be able to bribe people to keep in line by offering them stuff, by offering them jobs, offering them employment opportunities, all, you know, offering them a buoyant, booming economy. They can't really do that now, you know. So they have they have all the propaganda, constant propaganda, and then when that breaks down, you actually have policing. You have that society being policed in a very violent, kind of potentially very violent way. So I think this is this is something that's going to become more and more exposed as you know, as we move, as the system that we have, the economic and political systems become more strained, and because they're basically unable to deliver anything to the citizens.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Yeah, again, it was just, you know, police is a major issue across our nation, especially in California still. And yeah, I think you've summed up a few key points that right now the system has nothing else to give except more police.
Also, a discussion of identity politics on that too, which is kind of leads into the next question. It's like, honestly, speaking from personal experience, one of the things I envy about Scottish independence and the Scottish independence movement is that Scotland has a well-developed sense of Scottish national identity. That's a problem facing Californians discussing independence, where US history was purposely whitewashed to ignore any form of California's regional identity. And really, I mean, is there any idea that you might have on how we could move forward from that?
Well, it would be arrogant for me in the extreme to say that, you know, how California should get independence, because I mean, when you look at all sort of independence movements, you know, right across Europe and the Americas, some of them, like, you know, the Parti Québécois was very strong in Canada at one time, and it was a very linguistic kind of cultural sort of division with the rest of Canada. Other nationalist sort of or independence movements have been very much more economically based. I mean, and if you look at Catalan, that's a mixture of the two. There's a linguistic division, but there is also an economic boom that Catalonia has kind of suddenly sort of become this economic powerhouse within Spain. And you know, and I think that with Scotland, it's kind of felt the idea that we've been run as a branch economy. We've never got to our full potential. We've never been able to sort of to operate economic levers that are going to sort of that we can use to address all the issues that we have and to attract the kind of investment that we need and the sort of development that we need. I mean, it's been the only country in the West that's population has remained static for decades and decades, and that's a massive, that's a massive indictment of where it actually sits in this whole kind of pantheon of of European states. I think that with California, it's been such a wealthy sort of part of America. It's been such a culturally predominant part of America because of just because of the idea of the last frontier and Hollywood, and so there's so much there is so much kind of cultural ballast that California has. And I think again, it's that sort of the identity thing has been pushed to the background in the USA, and this really did happen, I suppose. I suppose after the defeat of the Confederacy, this really sort of was intensified, and that America, and people obviously progressive nations, like progressive areas like California, would think, well, this is actually a good thing, but it's it's an interesting thing for California is part of, is the one of the most, so probably the most progressive part of America, culturally now trying to thinking about freeing itself from the rest of America to get into this position. So I think there has to be at state level a kind of growth of Californian consciousness, basically. And that would come. I think that would come at all levels. About a teaching of distinctly Californian history, a sort of an overview of all the things that are kind of happening specifically to the state that don't really happen elsewhere. And I think that is. I mean, I don't know what kind of mechanisms for that. I don't know how receptive politicians are right across the state to that kind of thing. But I think that it's something that I think you can't really rely on the economic thing. You have to have an identity thing going on as well, I think.
Well, I believe it's part of California's sort of American psychosis that goes, America as a nation hates California for who we are, and Californians as a people don't really know who that is. So it doesn't really lend to to self-definition or self-realization.
Well, I think that the thing about it is that I mean, there's so many a lot of progressive ideas and alternative ideas, and the hippie movement, and sort of the Timothy Leary kind of stuff, and all the Ken Kesey kind of, there's sort of that last frontier and that kind of thing, and that seems to be that when people give California a hard time, particularly people on the right give California a hard time, it seems to be kind of garnished by all this sort of kind of stuff. But when you actually are in California, most people don't recognize that being anything to do with the reality of California. The reality of it is just kind of very much, in a lot of ways, it's people kind of working and living in different industries, and it's like sometimes it's like if you look at kind of the oil fields and all that kind of stuff, and down in Orange and all that, you could be in Texas basically. There's that kind of diversity of the state, just basically to hang it into this kind of sort of this kind of hippie alternative thing isn't really how people perceive it to be, basically. I mean, in San Francisco, there's an identity, to still palpably towards all that, but LA is very much about the movies, and it's basically a sort of factory town, or it has been. It's kind of in decline in that way now. But and San Diego is all about the kind of the air bases, the military, and is all like sort of is a kind of basically a Republican kind of part of the state. So there's a massive diversity in California, which doesn't really lend itself to this sort of to the, you know, go to San Francisco and wear some flowers in your hair type kind of thing. Yeah?
I have a final question. It goes, would you care to tell us what's in the works for novelists, playwrights, screenwriter, film director, storyteller, and Scottish independence advocate Irvine Welsh? And what should we look for coming up? And do you have a website where we can go and find your books
Yeah,
and movies and T-shirts and that?
I've got a website that's perennially out of date, but I'm working on a lot of stuff right now. We've shot the second season of Crime, a TV show over here on ITVX. So that'll come out. It'll be relaunched. The first season will be relaunched on ITV in April, and then it will come out on ITVX in autumn. I think it'll be the same for. I think America. It's going to be through BritBox and the streaming platform. I've got a new novel coming out this year, in August, and another one next year. I'm working on this Berlin show about techno and the rise of they follow the Berlin Wall and the sort of melding of the tribes of Berlin and the kind of music sort of that came out of it. I've got my band touring this year. We're doing a lot of tours, doing a lot of festivals this year. We've got a new single out, and we've set up a record label last year, which has been really busy. And we're doing the Trainspotting musical in autumn. So we've kind of written all the songs for that, and we're taking that into the West End, straight into the West End with a big theatrical producer there. So it's really all go. It's been a crazy couple of years. I mean, following lockdown, all I did was write, and now it's all coming out basically at once. So it's a mad time for me.
Mr. Irvine Welsh, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us.
Thank you, guys, and I'm sorry I had this problem with technology, but hopefully we
all suffer with it.
We all do. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it, sir. Thanks for the time.
Sean.
Hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Definitely.
Red Star Rebels, we've been speaking with longtime voice for independence, Irvine Welsh. For more information on Irvine Welsh's collective works, we suggest you go to the website listed below.